We've enjoyed our independence from Great Britain for 237 years and counting. But for Scots voting in a referendum today, deciding whether to break from the United Kingdom isn't easy. Is the pride that comes from an independent Scotland worth leaving the security and stability of the UK? Here's how the Yes campaign puts it.
On September 18th, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to choose a new path for Scotland and build a more prosperous and fairer nation.
But former Prime Minister Gordon Brown is helping lead the No campaign, telling his fellow Scots they are better together with the UK.
Our unity is our strength, and I'm voting for my children's future and all Scottish children's future, and that's why I'm voting no.
For Scottish expats here in Boston, whether to cheer on the independence movement comes down to whether to follow your head or your heart. WGBH News reporter Adam Riley has more.
The Haven Bar in Jamaica Plain is a hotbed of Scottish culture, from the photos of famous Scots on the walls to the kilt worn by owner Jason Waddleton. It's also a place where local Scots who can't participate in today's independence vote can still have a say.
There's been a tremendous amount of interest in it. The box keeps getting full, so we're up at 600 just now.
For over a week now, the Haven has been holding its own referendum, open to local Scots and anyone else. Early returns show the Haven's voters favoring secession from the UK, which happens to be Waddleton's position too.
They're both compelling arguments, you know, it's almost like your heart and your head. At the end of the day, if I was to step into a ballot booth in Scotland today, I would probably be compelled to just give it a shot in the dark and go, you know, go for it.
As Waddleton sees it, England's increasing conservatism and Scotland's staunch liberalism simply aren't a good fit.
It's not about Braveheart, it's not about anti-English, it's more about, you know, Scottish people having that feeling of creating a better social society.
That idea was echoed by Scottish emigre John Morris, who cast his vote at the Haven for independence.
I think it's worth going after. I think that immediately it'll be difficult, very difficult. But I think in the long run it would be absolutely brilliant for Scotland.
For Warren O'Reilly, an Irishman from London, his vote was a predictable yes.
If it can be done in Scotland, it can be done in Northern Ireland, which is personal to me and my family.
The Haven's poll closes at 7 p.m., after which regulars will turn to coverage of the real referendum. Waddleton is looking forward to a busy night, but anxious about the end result.
If you'd asked me this 2 weeks ago, I would have said it was going to be yes. And today, this morning, it looks like it's gone a little bit from 50-50 in favour of the No campaign. So that's where we think it's probably going to go. But it's a long night ahead, yeah.
In Jamaica Plain, Adam Riley, WGBH News.
Polls have just closed in Scotland, and with no exit polling, we won't learn the outcome of the referendum until early tomorrow morning. But my next guest has some insights. Rod Sharp is a Scottish expat who hosts a BBC radio show from his home in Marblehead. Welcome to you. Well, by all accounts, Rod, this is going to be very, very close. And I heard you on the radio this morning talking with your mom, who's visiting you in Marblehead, and your niece. She's young. She's voting to secede, and your mom is saying no. One of the things your mom said is, we're not ready, we're not ready. Somebody might have said that about the United States. I'm sure they did 237 years ago. I mean, at some point, you've been part of the country for 300 years. If you want to secede, when are you ever going to be ready, if not now?
That's right. You've got to grow up. I mean, as my niece said again, you've got to throw away your training wheels sometime. You've got to leave the house and say, OK, bye-bye, Mum and Dad. It's time for me to live on my own. And that's the emotional argument. And it's a terribly powerful one. And I think if we were in Scotland today, Emily, we'd be surrounded with this massive, excited enthusiasm. Whereas here, of course, we tend to take a more stood-back position, you know. Yeah. It's a much harder thing to deal with when you're not there.
But I think over the last couple of weeks anyway, we feel like we're there. We're really people were kind of poo-pooing this in this country anyway, thinking it wasn't real. I mean, you know, the naysayers are saying, oh, well, you know, the power of the European Union, military force, diplomatic missions, all these things you have to start from scratch with. But the UK isn't going to leave them just to sink or swim.
You wouldn't think so. I mean, the UK, the rest of the UK, as we would call it, would have to be tremendously vindictive towards Scotland. But of course, they've had it up to here with the Scots saying, we want this, and they've realised how much the Scots have got. I mean, I don't think a lot of people in the UK realise that Scots have, on balance, about £1,200 more a year of the public purse to play with, for a variety of good reasons. You know, many of them to do with the distance and the area of the country and so on. So there's an imbalance. It's like the imbalance here, you know, between states in like Mississippi, for example, which have more federal spending than other states, which are in a better population position too.
But doesn't Scotland also feel like they could control their own destiny in terms of their mineral wealth, oil wealth?
Yes.
It's like right now they're sharing it with everybody.
Oh, sure, you can say oil, and everybody does say oil. And of course, there's a group called N56. There have been these marvellous sort of pressure groups and interest groups which have arisen. And N56 have said there are 21 more million barrels of oil than anybody else has said there are. This is being rather poo-pooed by people in the oil industry, including a guy called Ian Wood, you know, who's very scathing about what they say. He says, look, we've passed peak oil in the North Sea. Peak oil in the North Sea was round about 1999. And indeed, you can argue that if the Scots had really gone for it in 1979 and indeed been allowed a chance like this, they'd be in a much stronger position. They could be independent. They could have an oil fund like Norway. But this funny talk about an oil fund probably is really not going to come to pass the way that most people dream it should.
So I was interested that 16-year-olds are allowed to vote. I don't know if that was always the case or they changed the law for this.
This is special.
So this is really an opportunity to get the youth vote who are going to vote for the secession,
I know.
or so they think.
Well, so they think, but you can actually look at the polling of 16 to 18-year-olds, and they're very conservative. You know, they've had a lot of, maybe they still live with their mum and dad, and they, you know, they do what their mum and dads do. But it's not until they're 19 that they start to break out into this obvious yes pattern. So 16 to 18s are about 100,000 people, and they might be a bit of a drag on the yes vote.
So when people generalize and say, well, Scottish people are more liberal and kind of resistant to the Conservative government in the UK, I mean, how so? Like in what positions?
Well, the Scots have been a Labour voting country. There's one Conservative MP in Scotland now. You know, the rest are all Labour. Labour positions are more amenable, it is said, to the Scottish idea of fairness. You know, we don't like the idea that people fall behind. Even people with substantial wealth are very pro the idea of you know, sharing it out, but they don't necessarily want to share it out with a gun to their heads. And there is a good deal of talk about wealthier Scots heading south of the border. So
Scotland, unlike the rest of the UK, as you would put it, is a much more homogeneous group. I mean,
they're more like us. I mean, you know, the Scots, after all, are major signers of the Declaration of Independence. You're a Scot, right? 4 signers of the Declaration were Scottish. You know, the ideals that this country is founded on are ideals of fairness and democracy that are at home in Scotland, you know, and found their home in Scotland during the mid-18th century when all this ferment was happening.
So I heard you, once again, I heard you on the radio this morning. It was great, the generational differences between your mum and your niece, and, you know, the passion that each of them, you know, in both well thought out arguments, and then you were kind of put in the middle to speculate on what was going to happen. So I'm going to do the same thing to you.
Well, listen, as I think it's Alan at the Haven said, the polls that were taken, the last Ipsos Mori poll shows slightly more people going for a no vote, but that doesn't really tell the whole story, because the yes campaign's been spectacular. The no campaign has been, with, you know, few exceptions, a disaster. So if they can't get the people out on the day, and if the yes campaign are as well organised as they may be, there could be a terrific upset. 97%
turnout. That puts the United States of America to shame.
It's a 97% turnout.
Of course, there's only 5 million people living there, but
yeah,
still.
But come on. I mean, actually, it's a 97% registration. If we get 97% turnout, it's going to be a yes.
Oh, I thought it was turnout already.
Oh, no, it's registration.
Oh, registration.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But even so,
well,
that's of all the eligible voters.
That's amazing.
That's phenomenal.
All right, we'll see about that. Rod Sharp, pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks.